A Navy SEAL walked along the waterfront with a German Shepherd puppy riding high on his back, both of them smiling like they had done this 100 times before. But only months earlier, that same puppy had been too frightened to step out of an open crate. Nathan Brooks had given Milo a home, yet freedom was something the little dog still didn't understand. Weeks passed, then months. Milo learned to cross the floor, sleep outside his crate, and quietly wait for Nathan to come home, but he still kept his distance. So what would happen when Nathan began to wonder if patience was enough? What tiny moment would finally reveal that Milo had been changing all along? And how could the frightened puppy who once feared an open doorway ever become the dog smiling from Nathan's backpack beside the water? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late March had brought a mild, gray afternoon to Chesapeake, Virginia. The kind of early spring day when the air still carried winter's cool edge, but the trees had begun showing the faintest green along their branches. Nathan Brooks had planned to spend his day off doing nothing more complicated than laundry, grocery shopping, and perhaps sleeping longer than his Navy schedule usually allowed. Instead, he found himself backing a borrowed rescue van toward the loading entrance of a modest animal shelter on the outskirts of the city. Nathan was 40 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad through the shoulders and lean through the waist, with the controlled athletic build of a man who had spent most of his adult life training his body to respond before exhaustion could become an excuse. His dark brown hair was cut close, in the military style he had worn for years, and a neatly trimmed beard sharpened a square jaw that already looked serious even when he was relaxed. His blue-gray eyes tended to study a room before he entered it fully. It was an old habit, useful in the Navy SEAL teams and occasionally ridiculous in places like grocery stores and veterinary offices. With friends, Nathan could be dryly funny and surprisingly patient. With himself, he was considerably less generous. He believed problems were meant to be identified, broken into smaller parts, and solved. That belief had served him well in the military. He did not yet understand how badly it could fail him with a frightened 4-month-old puppy. Nathan had volunteered because the shelter needed extra hands transporting several dogs recently released into rescue care after authorities had closed an unlicensed breeding operation. He had not asked for details beyond what was necessary. The animals had been examined, the legal paperwork had finally cleared, and the shelter was trying to move them into quieter, temporary spaces. "You picked an interesting day to volunteer," said Megan Foster, the shelter coordinator who met him inside. Megan was a compact 34-year-old woman with curly auburn hair tied into a loose knot, freckles across a pale face, and the permanently tired but alert eyes of someone accustomed to noticing which animal had eaten, which volunteer had forgotten the latch, and which adopter needed to be gently told no. She spoke quickly, worked faster, and had the practical kindness of a person who knew sympathy meant very little unless someone remembered to refill the water bowls. "Most of them are overwhelmed, but they're moving," she hesitated. "One isn't." Nathan followed her down a narrow hallway lined with temporary crates. Some dogs barked when he passed, others pressed noses toward the doors. One small mixed-breed dog pawed impatiently at a blanket, as if personally offended by confinement. Nathan almost smiled. Then they reached the final room. The German Shepherd puppy inside the transport crate did not bark. He did not whine. He did not even move toward the door. He was roughly 4 months old, male, black and tan, with a dark mask covering most of his narrow young face and tan markings beginning to brighten along his legs and cheeks. His body was slightly underweight, making his paws look too large for the rest of him, as though nature had already prepared the feet for a dog the body had not yet grown into. One ear stood halfway upright while the other folded softly to the side. His brown eyes followed Nathan immediately, but his body remained pressed against the rear wall of the crate. There was no challenge in his expression, no aggression, only vigilance. Nathan had seen fear expressed loudly before. Fear could shout, shake, run, fight. This was quieter. The puppy had made himself small enough that perhaps the world would leave him alone. "That's Milo," Megan said softly. He's spent most of his life in a space not much bigger than that. Enough room to stand, turn around, lie down, not much else. Nathan looked at the open crate door. "And now he won't come out?" Megan shook her head. "Not if someone's nearby. We tried giving him more room when he first arrived. He panicked and went straight back inside. So now we leave the door open whenever it's safe and let him decide." Nathan stared at Milo for several seconds. The human instinct, he thought, was often embarrassingly simple. See something trapped, open the door, expect gratitude. But an open door meant nothing to an animal who had never learned what existed beyond it. Nathan lowered himself onto the floor about 6 feet from the crate. Megan glanced at him. "You don't have to—" "I know." He rested his forearms loosely over his knees and looked slightly away from Milo instead of directly at him. Nathan had spent years being trained to act decisively under pressure. Yet some situations demanded the opposite skill, the discipline not to interfere. He did not say Milo's name. He did not offer his hand. He did not crawl closer. He simply sat. Minutes passed. Dogs barked somewhere beyond the wall. A metal bowl clattered in another room. Megan came and went twice, wisely leaving them alone. Nathan felt the stiffness growing in his knees but stayed where he was. Milo's nose twitched. Eventually the puppy shifted forward. Nathan saw one oversized paw move toward the opening. It stopped at the edge. Then, with painful caution, Milo placed that paw onto the floor outside the crate. Nathan felt an absurd urge to celebrate it. Instead, he breathed normally and kept his eyes lowered. Milo held the position for perhaps 2 seconds before pulling the paw back inside. That was all. To anyone walking past, almost nothing had happened. To Nathan, something had. The puppy had tested the border of his entire known world. His phone vibrated against his thigh before he could think too deeply about it. The caller was his mother. Nathan stepped into the hallway before answering. Helen Brooks was 69, a slender woman with short, silver-blonde hair, warm hazel eyes, and fine lines around her mouth that deepened whenever she smiled. She had spent most of her adult life managing a household with an efficiency her son privately suspected could have qualified her to command a small nation. After her husband died several years earlier, Helen had remained in the Chesapeake house where Nathan and his older sister had grown up. Nathan had always assumed she would stay there indefinitely. Helen rarely made dramatic announcements, which was why her opening sentence stopped him cold. "I've decided to sell the house." Nathan straightened. "What?" "The realtor is coming next week." "Mom, slow down. I am moving slowly. You just said you're selling the house." Helen exhaled quietly. "Nathan, I've been thinking about it for over a year." He pictured the brick house with the white porch railing, his father's workbench in the garage, the marks on the laundry room doorframe where childhood heights had been recorded in pencil. To Nathan, the house was not real estate. It was evidence that some things had survived every deployment, every funeral, every change he had been unable to prevent. "You don't have to do this just because Dad's gone," he said. Helen's voice remained calm. "I'm not doing it because he's gone. I'm doing it because I'm still here." Nathan had no answer ready for that, so he did what people often did when emotion refused to fit inside logic. He objected to practical details instead. The timing, the market, the effort. Helen listened without arguing. "We'll talk later," she finally said, "but I'm not making this decision quickly." When the call ended, Nathan stood staring at the blank screen longer than necessary. He returned to the room and found Milo exactly where he had left him. Something about that irritated him, not at the puppy, but at the strange similarity he did not want to examine. His mother wanted to step out of a house Nathan associated with safety. Milo had an open crate and refused to leave it. Nathan immediately understood why forcing the puppy would be wrong, yet he was perfectly willing to push Helen back into a place she no longer wanted, simply because it made him feel secure. The thought was uncomfortable enough that he dismissed it. Instead, he asked Megan about adoption procedures. Megan raised an eyebrow. "You came here to drive a van." "That was the plan. And now?" Nathan looked toward Milo. "Now I'm asking questions." He did not make the decision impulsively. He asked about veterinary follow-ups, behavioral support, feeding, exercise, and what a puppy with limited early socialization might require. He explained his Navy schedule plainly, including the days he could be away for training. He already had a trusted neighbor willing to help occasionally, but occasional help was not enough. So Megan insisted he identify a reliable backup caregiver before approval. Nathan called Rachel, his older sister, and arranged that practical piece before finishing the application. By late afternoon, after paperwork, discussion, and several reminders from Megan that patience would matter more than enthusiasm, Milo officially belonged to Nathan. The trip to Virginia Beach was quiet. Milo remained inside the secured crate in the back of Nathan's vehicle, watching through the gate without making a sound. Nathan spoke only occasionally, not because he expected the puppy to understand, but because silence suddenly felt too large. His townhouse was clean, orderly, and almost aggressively practical. Neutral furniture, uncluttered counters, shoes lined up by the door. Everything in a place because Nathan liked knowing where things belonged. He carried Milo's crate into the living room and opened it. Then he placed a soft dog bed just outside the entrance, added a water bowl several feet away, and backed off. Milo watched him. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Eventually, the puppy stretched his neck forward. One paw crossed the threshold, then another. Milo stepped out just far enough to sniff the edge of the soft bed. Nathan remained seated across the room, barely breathing. Milo touched the fabric with his nose, froze, and retreated back inside the crate. Nathan did not close the door that night. Before going upstairs, he checked the water, turned off the main light, and left a small lamp glowing in the corner. "Good night, Milo," he said, receiving no visible response. In the morning, pale daylight entered through the blinds and spread across the living room floor. Nathan came downstairs expecting, without admitting it to himself, some tiny evidence of progress. The bed was untouched. Milo remained curled on the hard plastic floor inside the crate, his head resting against one oversized paw. The door had been open all night. Nothing had physically prevented him from leaving. Nathan stood several feet away and understood the first lesson Milo would teach him, though he did not yet have words for it. Freedom could be offered in a second. Believing in it could take much longer. The cage was open, but Milo still did not know he was allowed to step outside. The first week of April came softly to Virginia Beach, with cool mornings, damp sidewalks, and pale sunlight slipping between low clouds after several days of spring rain. Inside Nathan Brooks's townhouse, however, the world was anything but gentle to Milo. By the second morning, Nathan understood that carrying a frightened puppy out of a shelter had been the simplest part of what lay ahead. Milo's crate stood in one corner of the living room with its door permanently open, yet the 4-month-old German Shepherd treated the few yards beyond it like unexplored territory. The hardwood floor was the first enemy. Milo would stretch his neck forward, sniff, place one oversized tan paw beyond the crate, and freeze the instant his pads touched the smooth surface. If his foot slid even slightly, he retreated as though the floor itself had betrayed him. Nathan initially thought the problem might disappear once Milo realized nothing terrible happened. It did not. On the third morning, Nathan switched on the coffee maker, and its sudden hiss sent Milo scrambling backward so quickly that his shoulder bumped the crate wall. Nathan immediately shut the machine off. The following afternoon, a vacuum cleaner started somewhere in the neighboring townhouse. Milo dropped flat to the floor, ears pinned, eyes moving toward every possible exit. Later, Nathan's phone rang on the kitchen counter, and the bright electronic sound produced the same reaction. None of these things were unusual in a human home. That was precisely what disturbed Nathan. People built their lives around thousands of sounds and surfaces they stopped noticing. A refrigerator starting, pipes knocking, a door closing, a shaft of sunlight moving across a room. To Milo, ordinary life arrived without explanation, one small ambush after another. Nathan began changing the house rather than expecting Milo to change immediately. He bought several inexpensive runner rugs and laid them in a narrow path from the crate, across the living room, through the kitchen, and toward the back door. It looked ridiculous, like a carpeted runway designed by someone who had lost an argument with an interior decorator. But Milo used it. At first he traveled only when Nathan stood well away. Nathan resisted every instinct to encourage him too enthusiastically. He had learned quickly that even praise could become pressure when it arrived too loudly. So he sat sideways rather than facing Milo, kept his voice low, and allowed the puppy to control the distance between them. When Milo backed away from an offered hand, Nathan withdrew it instead of following. When the puppy refused to approach the sofa, Nathan stopped trying to lure him closer. There would be no lifting him onto furniture for a photograph, no pulling him through doorways because it would be faster, no assumption that affection was something Nathan was entitled to simply because he had provided food and shelter. That realization humbled him more than he expected. Human beings were remarkably skilled at turning kindness into a transaction without admitting it. They rescued something and unconsciously waited for gratitude. They offered love and wanted visible proof that it had been received. Milo owed Nathan none of that. Routine became the first language they could share. Breakfast appeared at the same time each morning. The back door opened after meals. Evening walks followed the same short route past 3 townhouses, a row of young maples, and a mailbox cluster at the end of the street. Nathan chose the route because it was quiet, predictable, and close enough to home that Milo never had to face too much at once. Even so, covering a distance that Nathan could walk in less than a minute sometimes took 20. Milo would stop at a storm drain and stare at it. He would freeze when a delivery truck turned onto the street. A plastic grocery bag caught by the wind once rolled across a driveway, and Milo immediately tried to reverse himself all the way back toward the townhouse. Nathan shortened the leash without pulling and waited. At first, the waiting irritated some old corner of him. His professional life rewarded efficiency. Training exercises had objectives, timelines, standards, and measurable improvement. Here, success might mean standing beside a mailbox for 7 minutes while a puppy decided whether the world was ending. Yet gradually Nathan began recognizing that patience was not inactivity. Sometimes patience was the work. When Milo finally took one cautious step after being frozen for several minutes, Nathan found himself valuing that step more than accomplishments that would have looked far more impressive to anyone watching. Several days after bringing Milo home, Nathan drove to Chesapeake to help Helen begin sorting the family house. Rachel had offered to come on the weekend, but Helen had already started by herself, arranging cardboard boxes in the dining room and labeling them "Keep, Donate, and Trash" in thick black marker. Nathan entered the house and immediately felt the strange sensation of being 40 years old and 12 at the same time. The familiar smell of old wood, laundry detergent, and Helen's coffee seemed unchanged. His father's brown radio still sat on a shelf near the kitchen. A set of heavy drinking glasses remained in the dining cabinet. In the den stood an old wooden armchair with one damaged leg, repaired years ago with a metal bracket that never quite sat straight. Helen placed the radio in the donation box. Nathan removed it. That was Dad's. Helen looked at him but said nothing. 10 minutes later, she put the glasses into another donation box. Nathan moved those too. We use these every Christmas. They're glasses, Nathan. They're the good ones. Helen gave him the look that had survived his adolescence, his enlistment, and every attempt he had ever made to argue around something she already understood. You don't drink from them. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Nathan did not answer. He carried the crooked armchair toward the keep side before Helen stopped him. That chair is broken. I can fix it. You have been saying that for 6 years. I've been busy. So has the chair. Nathan almost laughed, but the humor faded when he noticed Helen watching him more carefully. He wore a soft blue sweater and dark slacks, her silver blonde hair neatly brushed back from a face that seemed smaller in the large house than Nathan remembered. At 69, she was still active and independent, but there was a quiet decisiveness in her that had strengthened after her husband's death. Helen did not dislike memories. She simply refused to let memories make every decision for her. "You know what you're doing?" she asked. Nathan folded his arms. "Helping? No. You're putting everything back, because you're throwing away half the house." "I'm giving away things I don't use." Helen glanced toward the boxes. "You want the house to stay exactly as you remember it because you don't live here every day." "I do." Nathan looked toward his father's radio. The accusation stung because it was not really an accusation. It was an observation, and observations were harder to fight. He thought of Milo retreating into his crate whenever the living room became too unfamiliar. The comparison appeared before Nathan could stop it. He rejected it immediately. A house filled with memories was not a cage. His mother was not a frightened animal. Yet he had to admit that he was treating familiarity as though it were automatically safer than change. "I just don't understand why everything has to happen at once," he said. Helen softened slightly. "It isn't happening at once. You're only seeing the part where I finally told you." She picked up the radio again, but did not return it to the donation box. Instead, she handed it to Nathan. "If this matters to you, take it home. But don't make me keep it so you can visit it twice a year." Nathan accepted the radio without another argument. Back in Virginia Beach that evening, Milo was waiting inside the crate. Nathan placed the old radio on a shelf but did not turn it on. For the next several days, the house settled into its strange new rhythm. Milo learned that the runner rugs led safely from one room to another. He tolerated the coffee maker if Nathan stuttered it from farther away. He still disliked the telephone. Sunlight remained suspicious. One morning, Nathan opened the blinds and a bright rectangle stretched across the rug. Milo stopped at its edge and backed away. Nathan nearly laughed at the absurdity, then caught himself. Fear did not become silly simply because the observer understood the danger was imaginary. Human beings did the same thing, he thought. They stood before harmless changes carrying histories no one else could see. Nathan left the blinds open and walked away. An hour later, Milo crossed the light on his own. Near the end of the second week, Nathan woke during the night with a dry throat and went downstairs for water. He moved quietly, expecting to see Milo's familiar shape curled inside the crate. Instead, he stopped halfway into the living room. The crate was empty. For one sharp second, he thought something was wrong. Then he saw the puppy beneath the coffee table. Milo lay on his side about 6 feet from the open crate, long legs folded awkwardly, black and tan body relaxed against the rug. One ear rested flat while the other leaned sideways. He was asleep. Nathan's first impulse was to go closer, to crouch beside him, perhaps touch his shoulder and somehow acknowledge what had happened. He did none of those things. Recognition did not require possession. Some victories became smaller the moment a person grabbed at them. Nathan stood there for several seconds, then quietly returned upstairs without waking him. Behind him, the crate door remained open. For the first time in Milo's life, the puppy had chosen to sleep where there were no bars around him. By the middle of April, Virginia Beach had begun to feel unmistakably like spring. The mornings were cool enough for a light jacket, but by afternoon the air carried the softer warmth of the Atlantic coast, and young leaves had begun filling the trees along Nathan Brooks's street. Nearly a month had passed since Milo came home. The German Shepherd puppy no longer looked quite as fragile as he had at the shelter. Regular meals had begun filling out his narrow body. The hollows around his ribs were less noticeable beneath his black and tan coat, and his oversized paws no longer seemed quite so comical against his legs. One ear now stood upright most mornings, while the other still folded toward the side whenever Milo became tired. Nathan found that detail strangely reassuring. Milo was growing. There was proof of that. What Nathan could not measure so easily was everything happening inside him. Milo still did not run to the door when Nathan returned from work. Most evenings, Nathan stepped inside, placed his keys on the counter, and found Milo watching from somewhere beyond the living room. Sometimes the puppy stood in the hallway. Sometimes he remained beside the open crate, his tail rarely moved. His expression did not say, "Welcome home," in any way Nathan recognized. When Nathan sat on the sofa, Milo usually chose the opposite side of the room, lowering himself onto one of the runner rugs with enough distance between them to make clear that closeness remained optional. Nathan had expected this in theory. Living with it every day proved different. Human beings liked progress when it announced itself. A first step, a graduation, a promotion, a finish line crossed while someone applauded. Milo offered none of that. His progress existed in details small enough to disappear if Nathan was tired or impatient. So Nathan began keeping a record. It started on an ordinary evening after work, when he realized he had spent 10 minutes trying to decide whether Milo was doing better than the week before. Nathan took a small black notebook from a kitchen drawer and wrote the date across the top. Beneath it, he wrote one sentence: "Milo drank water while I was standing in the kitchen." It looked almost ridiculous on paper. Nathan stared at it, then added a number beside it, day 23. Before then, Milo usually waited until Nathan left the room before approaching the bowl. Nathan had never realized that drinking water in front of another living creature could represent trust. Yet there it was. Once he began paying attention, more things appeared. Milo no longer flinched every time the refrigerator motor started. He could walk the runner rug path to the back door without stopping at each threshold. He sometimes remained lying down when Nathan crossed the room instead of immediately standing to create distance. None of it would have impressed a stranger. That was becoming the point. On day 31, Nathan came through the kitchen carrying a basket of clean laundry, just as Milo emerged from the hall. For a second, Nathan expected the puppy to stop, calculate another route, or turn around. Milo did none of those things. He continued walking and passed within 4 feet of Nathan without changing pace. Nathan froze with a towel hanging over one arm. Milo disappeared into the living room as if nothing important had occurred. Nathan quietly set down the basket, opened the notebook, and wrote, "Walked past me without stopping." He almost laughed at himself. He had spent years in a profession where success could mean completing objectives under conditions most people would never voluntarily enter. Now a puppy walking past his knees without panicking felt worthy of written documentation. Perhaps, Nathan thought, that said less about how small Milo's victory was and more about how poorly people understood the size of another creature's fear. Day 37 brought another entry. Nathan woke early and came downstairs before turning on the lights. Milo was sleeping beside the coffee table, no longer under it. More important, he was stretched on his side rather than curled tightly with his nose protected beneath his tail. His long legs extended loosely across the rug. His belly was partially exposed. Nathan knew enough about dogs to understand what vulnerability looked like. Milo had not chosen Nathan's feet, or the sofa, or even the space beside him, but somewhere during the night the puppy's body had stopped preparing itself for danger. Nathan stood in the doorway for a moment and felt something almost like gratitude. He did not write trust in the notebook. The word felt too large. Instead, he wrote exactly what he had seen. Slept on his side, legs stretched out. That weekend brought a different test. Nathan's older sister, Rachel Brooks, arrived with her daughter to visit. Rachel was 42, 2 years older than Nathan, with a medium-height, sturdy build, shoulder-length dark brown hair threaded with a few early strands of gray, and brown eyes that had always seemed capable of identifying nonsense before the person speaking had finished producing it. She worked as a registered nurse, a career that suited her direct, practical temperament. Years of hospital shifts had made Rachel compassionate without making her sentimental. She cared deeply, but she rarely confused caring with agreeing. Her 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, was slimmer and small for her age, with light brown hair tied into a loose ponytail, fair skin scattered with freckles across her nose, and large hazel eyes that seemed to collect questions faster than adults could answer them. Sophie was naturally energetic, but unlike many children her age, she could become remarkably still when something truly interested her. Milo interested her immediately. "Can I pet him?" Sophie whispered the moment she saw two dark ears watching from the hallway. "No," Nathan said. Sophie looked surprised. "Not yet. Maybe not today." "He doesn't like kids?" "He doesn't know what he likes yet." Nathan crouched beside her and explained the rules. No walking directly toward Milo, no reaching over his head, no following if he moved away. Most importantly, Milo was allowed to say no without anyone taking it personally. Sophie considered this with the seriousness children sometimes gave instructions adults expected them to resist. Then she carried a book into the living room, sat cross-legged on the rug, and began reading. It was a children's adventure novel she had already read twice, which meant she did not care if she lost her place. Milo remained in the hallway. For nearly half an hour he watched her. Sophie never called him. When she turned pages, Milo's ears shifted toward the sound. Once he stepped forward, then changed his mind. Nathan noticed but said nothing. Rachel noticed too. Later, after Sophie had gone into the kitchen for juice, Rachel glanced toward Nathan. "You've changed." Nathan frowned. "Because I'm sitting quietly?" "Because something isn't doing what you want, and you haven't tried to fix it by Tuesday." Nathan gave her a dry look. "Good to see you too." Rachel smiled, but the humor did not last long. She had come for another reason. Helen had officially listed the Chesapeake house for sale that week. A sign was going up in the yard. Rachel supported the decision. Nathan still did not. "That place is too much for her," Rachel said. "3 bedrooms she barely uses, a yard she pays someone else to maintain. And those stairs. She handles the stairs fine. For now. She's 69, Rachel, not 90. I know exactly how old our mother is." Nathan leaned against the counter, feeling irritation rise faster than he wanted. "Everybody suddenly acts like she needs to leave immediately." "No, Mom wants to leave." "That house matters. To you. To all of us." Rachel folded her arms. "Nathan, you visit a few times a month. Mom wakes up there every morning. She goes up those stairs every night. She walks past Dad's empty side of the closet every day. You want her to preserve the house because when you come home, you want something to look the way you remember it." Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Maybe not. But is it wrong?" He had no immediate answer. That bothered him more than the accusation. Rachel was not saying he had loved their father too much. She was saying he had confused his own comfort with their mother's responsibility. Nathan thought about the old radio now sitting on a shelf in his townhouse. Helen had not thrown away the memory. She had simply refused to remain its caretaker for everyone else. The following weekend, Sophie came again. She carried the same book and sat in the same place on the living room rug without being reminded. Milo watched from the hallway as before. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Nathan was at the kitchen counter pretending to read an email while watching from the corner of his eye. Sophie turned another page. Milo stepped forward. One paw, then another. He crossed the entrance to the living room and stopped. Sophie did not look up. Milo sniffed the air, walked several more feet and lowered himself onto the rug about 8 feet from her. Nathan felt the familiar impulse to acknowledge the moment, to praise Milo, to tell Sophie she had done well. He stopped himself. Sophie kept reading. Milo rested his chin between his paws. No one touched him. No one called him closer. No one celebrated. And because nobody demanded another step, Milo stayed exactly where he was. 8 feet away. A month earlier, 8 feet might as well have been a mile. By early July, summer had settled heavily over Virginia Beach. The mornings were already warm before the sun had climbed far. Cicadas buzzed from the trees by noon, and the sidewalks held heat well into the evening. Nearly 4 months had passed since Nathan Brooks brought Milo home. From a distance, the young German shepherd looked transformed. His black and tan coat had grown fuller, the sharpness around his ribs had disappeared, and his once awkward legs were beginning to match the oversized paws that had made him look unfinished as a puppy. Both ears now stood most of the time, though the left still tilted slightly when he was tired. He ate without hesitation, walked the familiar neighborhood route, followed the runner rugs through the house, and could settle in the living room without retreating automatically to the crate. Anyone seeing him for the first time might have said he was doing wonderfully. Nathan knew better. The physical distance between Milo and the world had narrowed. The emotional distance between Milo and Nathan seemed frozen in place. Nathan still came home to silence. Milo rarely approached the door. If Nathan entered the living room and sat on the sofa, Milo usually chose a rug several feet away. He tolerated Nathan passing nearby, accepted food from his hand on good days, and no longer reacted to every ordinary movement as a threat. But he did not seek touch. He never leaned against Nathan's leg, never rested his head on Nathan's knee, never came looking for affection. Nathan had learned not to compare Milo with other dogs, but comparison crept in anyway. At the neighborhood park, he saw dogs dragging owners toward strangers for attention. He watched a Labrador roll shamelessly onto its back while a woman laughed and rubbed its belly. He saw an elderly beagle fall asleep with its chin across its owner's shoe. These were tiny, ordinary displays of trust, and Nathan discovered that he envied them in ways he did not like admitting. His notebook continued filling, but the entries had become harder to write. Day 71. Milo stayed in the room while I folded laundry. Day 84. Did not move when I walked past while he was eating. Day 96. Stood 6 feet from the door when I came home. Progress existed, technically. Nathan could prove it, yet the pages no longer gave him the same reassurance. A thought began appearing at inconvenient moments. What if this is as far as he gets with me? Nathan disliked the thought because it sounded selfish. Milo was healthier, Milo was safer. That should have been enough. But another question followed, more uncomfortable than the first. Was Milo happy, or had he simply become good at surviving a larger cage? The idea stayed with Nathan through a long week of training. His unit had spent several demanding days running coastal exercises under brutal heat, and by Friday his shoulders ached. A thin layer of salt seemed permanently dried into his skin, and even his patience felt physically exhausted. When he finally pulled into his driveway that evening, Nathan switched off the engine but did not get out. The townhouse stood quietly beyond the windshield. A porch light glowed beside the door. Somewhere inside, Milo was probably lying on the rug in the usual corner. Nathan sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel. For the first time since the adoption, he allowed himself to think the sentence all the way through. Maybe Milo would do better somewhere else. The thought did not come from irritation. That would have been easier to dismiss. It came from fear. Nathan wondered whether a calmer household might help Milo more. Someone retired, someone home all day. Someone without irregular training schedules, early departures, and nights that occasionally ran late. Perhaps Nathan had mistaken commitment for suitability. People like to believe that wanting to do good made them the right person to do it. Nathan knew from his career that intention and competence were not the same thing. He stayed in the truck nearly 15 minutes, then he went inside. Milo was lying in his usual place. He lifted his head when Nathan entered, watched him remove his boots, and remained where he was. Nathan felt the familiar sting. For once, he did not hide from it. The following Monday, he scheduled an appointment with Milo's veterinarian. Dr. Laura Bennett was 48, tall and narrow-shouldered, with warm brown skin, dark curly hair cut just above her shoulders, and rectangular glasses that she constantly pushed back up her nose while speaking. She had the calm, measured manner of someone who had spent 2 decades dealing equally with frightened animals and frightened owners. She did not dramatize problems, but she also refused to minimize them. After examining Milo, checking his weight, joints, teeth, heart, and general condition. She sat on a low stool across from Nathan while Melissa remained near the wall. "Physically, he looks very good," Laura said. "That's not what I'm worried about." "I know." Nathan hesitated. Saying the concern aloud made it sound harsher. "I don't know if he's happy." Laura studied him rather than Milo. "What does happy look like to you?" Nathan almost answered immediately, then stopped. "Coming to me, wanting attention, being excited when I get home. That may come. It may come differently than you expect." Laura folded her hands. "You're measuring him against social behaviors he didn't have a chance to learn at the normal age." Nathan looked toward Milo. "So I wait. You continue giving him predictable choices, but I also want you to speak with someone who works specifically with fearful dogs." 2 days later, Nathan met Karen Mitchell, a certified canine behavior consultant recommended by Laura. Karen was 55, short and broad-hipped, with cropped silver hair, sun-browned skin, and pale green eyes that seemed perpetually amused, even when her face remained serious. She dressed simply in jeans and a faded navy polo, and carried no bag of tricks, no whistle, no equipment beyond a notebook and a pouch of treats. She had worked with rescue dogs for more than 15 years after adopting a fearful hound early in her career and realizing that conventional obedience training had done little to address fear itself. Karen spent almost an hour inside Nathan's townhouse without trying to touch Milo. Nathan noticed immediately. She sat at the kitchen table, turned her body slightly away from him, and watched what Milo chose to do when no one asked anything of him. "He checks where you are," she eventually said. Nathan looked over. "What?" "When you move rooms, he looks. When you stand, he tracks you. When you sat down, he adjusted where he was lying so he could see you." "He always does that." Karen smiled faintly. "Exactly." Nathan felt defensive without understanding why. "But he doesn't come over." "You're focusing on what he doesn't do." "Because after 4 months, you thought trust would eventually look like affection." Nathan did not answer. Karen continued. "For some dogs, trust starts much smaller, remaining in the same room, sleeping deeply, eating in your presence, turning their back on you, letting you walk past without preparing to escape. Those things don't photograph well, but they matter." Nathan leaned against the counter. "So there's nothing I should change?" "I didn't say that." "Keep the routine. Keep giving him choice. Don't turn every approach into a petting opportunity. If he comes closer, sometimes let nothing happen. That teaches him proximity doesn't create obligation." The sentence stayed with Nathan. Proximity doesn't create obligation. People often treated closeness as permission. A dog came within reach, so they touched it. A family member returned home, so everyone assumed they had a claim on that person's decisions. Nathan thought of Helen before he meant to. That same week, Helen received a serious offer on the Chesapeake house. Nathan drove over after work. The for sale sign in the yard irritated him before he even reached the door. Helen had already reviewed the offer with her realtor. It was fair. The buyer was pre-approved. Closing could happen within weeks. "You don't have to take the first good offer," Nathan said. "It isn't the first." "You could wait." "For what?" "A better one." Helen closed the folder on the dining table. "Is this about money?" Nathan knew immediately it was not. Helen knew too. The argument that followed was quieter than their previous ones, which somehow made it sharper. Nathan talked about memories, his father, family holidays, the garage, the height marks behind the laundry room door. Helen listened until he ran out of examples. Then she said, "Nathan, I loved your father for 43 years. Selling this house does not erase one day of that." "I never said it did." "You keep acting as if leaving means abandoning something." "It means losing the place." "No. It means changing the place." Nathan looked away. Helen's voice softened but did not weaken. "I am not running from the past. I am tired of maintaining a house built for a family of 4 when one woman lives in it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life guarding a museum so everyone else can visit their memories. The word museum landed hard. Nathan looked around the dining room. He realized how much of what he wanted preserved existed for the benefit of people who did not have to live there. Helen reached across the table and covered his hand briefly. You can love what happened here without requiring me to stay here. On the drive back to Virginia Beach, Nathan thought about Milo's crate. For months he had understood that forcing Milo out because the door was open would not be kindness. Yet with Helen, Nathan had been doing the opposite. He had been trying to keep someone inside a familiar place because familiarity made him feel safer. Love, he was beginning to understand, could become selfish while still believing itself protective. That evening, Nathan returned later than usual. The sky had darkened and only a few porch lights remained on along the row of townhouses. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the truck, and gathered his things. Before opening the door, movement behind the front window caught his eye. Milo was sitting behind the curtain. Only his head and upright ears were visible. Nathan stayed still. Milo was looking directly toward the driveway. The realization came slowly. He had heard the truck. He had come to the window. He had been waiting. Nathan got out and walked toward the house. By the time he unlocked the door, Milo had moved back several feet, returning to the distance he still preferred. A month earlier, Nathan would have focused on that retreat. He would have seen the gap between them and wondered why it remained. This time he saw what had happened before the door opened. Milo had not run to greet him. He had not wagged wildly or pressed against Nathan's legs. But he had noticed Nathan was gone, and he had been waiting for him to come home. For the first time, Nathan understood that Milo's affection might already be there. It simply spoke in a language quieter than the one Nathan had been expecting. By early September, nearly 6 months had passed since Milo first arrived at Nathan Brooks' townhouse in Virginia Beach. Summer still lingered in the afternoons, but the mornings had begun to carry the first cool breath of fall, and dry leaves occasionally scraped across the sidewalks before the sun warmed the neighborhood again. Milo no longer looked like the thin, unfinished puppy who had pressed himself against the back wall of a transport crate in March. The young German shepherd had grown taller through the shoulders. His black saddle had deepened against the warm tan of his legs and chest, and his once enormous paws finally looked as if they belonged to the rest of him. Both ears now stood upright, though the left one still tilted outward whenever he became tired. His body had changed faster than his confidence. He could move through Nathan's home without stopping at every doorway, eat with someone in the room, and even wait behind the curtain when he heard Nathan's truck return. Yet Nathan had learned not to mistake improvement for completion. Milo was still cautious with touch, still rarely approached without a reason, and still seemed to examine each unfamiliar moment before deciding whether it was safe. The difference was that Nathan no longer counted those things as failures. That change in Nathan mattered almost as much as anything happening inside Milo. Karen Mitchell's words from the previous month had stayed with him. Proximity does not create obligation. Nathan stopped reaching down whenever Milo happened to come within arm's length. Sometimes Milo walked past his chair and nothing happened. Sometimes he stood near the kitchen while Nathan made dinner and nobody called his name. Nathan began allowing closeness to be uneventful. It felt strangely difficult at first. Human affection often carried a hidden impatience. People wanted to reward trust the instant they saw it, to seize the moment before it disappeared. Nathan was beginning to understand that trust could vanish precisely because someone seized it. The morning everything shifted did not look important. Nathan had stopped at a pet store the previous evening and bought Milo a plain chew bone. He had purchased toys before, but most had gone untouched. A rope toy remained in a basket. A rubber ball had sat beneath a chair for weeks. Milo sniffed them occasionally, but seemed unable to understand why anyone would interact with an object that did not contain food. Nathan placed the bone on the living room rug after breakfast. Milo watched from several feet away. Nathan did not roll it toward him or wave it around. He simply put it down and walked into the kitchen to rinse his coffee mug. Less than 2 minutes later he returned. then stopped. Milo was lying on his side in the middle of the rug. The bone was trapped between his front paws. His jaws worked happily around one end, and every few seconds he adjusted his grip with the serious concentration of a craftsman solving an engineering problem. His tail tapped the rug once, then again. Nathan did not immediately understand why the sight affected him. Then he noticed Milo's eyes. They were not watching the doorway, not following Nathan, not measuring the distance to the crate. Milo was simply chewing, simply enjoying something. For 6 months, Nathan had watched the young dog evaluate nearly every room as if danger might be hidden somewhere inside it. Now, for perhaps the first time Nathan had witnessed, Milo had forgotten to check whether he was safe. He already felt safe. Nathan remained standing in the doorway until Milo finally noticed him. Milo lifted his head. Nathan expected the familiar stiffness. Instead, Milo stared for a second, lowered his head, and resumed chewing. A laugh escaped Nathan before he could stop it. "Well," he murmured. Apparently that was worth $12. Milo's tail struck the rug once more. Nathan almost opened the notebook. He decided not to. Some moments did not need to become evidence. Over the following weeks, play began arriving in Milo's life like a language remembered rather than learned. Nathan found an old tennis ball in the garage one afternoon and bounced it lightly across the patio. Milo watched it travel, head turning with almost comic precision. When the ball stopped, he approached carefully and sniffed it. Nathan rolled it again. Milo followed. By the 4th roll, caution had become curiosity. By the 6th, Milo pounced so clumsily that both front paws landed on opposite sides of the ball and sent it shooting backward beneath his stomach. Milo spun around, confused by the betrayal. Nathan laughed hard enough that Milo stopped and stared at him. "You did that," Nathan told him. "Don't blame the equipment." A few days later, Nathan discovered a shallow hole beside the fence in his small backyard. Milo stood beside it with dirt on his nose. Nathan looked at the hole, then at Milo. Milo looked toward the house. Nathan folded his arms. "Interesting." Milo sneezed. Nathan might have imagined the innocence in his expression, but he doubted it. By the end of the week, the excavation had grown large enough that Nathan finally covered it and placed a planter over the location. Milo responded by beginning another hole 3 feet away. This time, Nathan did not bother asking who had done it. The most surprising development came one evening when Milo suddenly burst across the backyard at full speed for no obvious reason. He made a wide loop around the patio chair, changed direction, nearly lost control of his back legs, recovered, and launched into another circle. Nathan stood holding a garden hose and stared. Milo raced past again, mouth open, ears upright, eyes bright. "Are these zoomies?" Nathan asked aloud. Milo answered by making another lap. Nathan laughed. It was not a careful laugh, not the quiet amusement he used with coworkers or the dry chuckle that usually accompanied his jokes. It came from somewhere deeper and caught him by surprise. For months he had wondered whether Milo was happy. Now happiness was tearing circles through the yard and nearly colliding with a flower pot. Yet the change was not linear. Some mornings Milo still startled at an unexpected noise. A delivery worker dropping a package too hard on the porch sent him retreating halfway down the hall. A neighbor carrying a large folded beach umbrella made him freeze during a walk. Nathan no longer treated those moments as proof they had gone backward. Recovery, he had learned, was not a staircase. It was more like a coastline, advancing here, retreating there, slowly changing shape while people standing too close complained that nothing was moving. Helen's house changed too. The sale had gone through. By the middle of September, most of the rooms Nathan remembered from childhood were filled with boxes instead of furniture. Helen had purchased a smaller townhouse less than 15 minutes from Rachel's home in Chesapeake. It had one level, a small patio, enough space for guests, and no staircase that would demand negotiations from aging knees in 10 years. Nathan came to help with the final sorting. This time, he behaved differently. The brown radio went into his own car because Helen had already told him he could keep it. He selected one small box of photographs. his parents standing beside a station wagon long before he was born, Rachel missing 2 front teeth at age 7, Nathan himself as a teenager, pretending not to smile beside his father. He also kept his father's old tool set, a heavy metal case scarred by decades of use. Everything else belonged to Helen's decision. A stack of old magazines went into recycling. Nathan said nothing. Several serving dishes were donated. He carried the box to the garage. An old floor lamp his father had repaired twice went to a neighbor. Nathan helped load it. Helen noticed. "You feeling all right?" she asked. Nathan looked at her. "You haven't rescued anything from the donation pile in almost 2 hours." "I'm growing." "At 40? Late development." Helen laughed, and for the first time the sound did not make the mostly empty house feel sad. Nathan looked around the room. Without the usual furniture, it appeared smaller than the home preserved in his memory. He realized that childhood had distorted its dimensions. The hallway had not shrunk. He had simply grown. Helen taped another box shut. "You know," she said, "letting go doesn't mean I didn't love it here." Nathan nodded. This time he believed her. More importantly, he understood that believing her meant allowing her to prove it with her own life, rather than demanding she preserve his version of hers. The final evening before Helen's move, Nathan returned to Virginia Beach tired from carrying boxes. Milo met him from several feet inside the living room, not at the door, but closer than he once would have been. Nathan changed clothes, heated dinner, and later settled onto the sofa with the television playing quietly. Milo wandered around the room. Nathan noticed but deliberately kept his attention on the screen. The young German shepherd approached the sofa, stopped, moved away, returned several minutes later. Nathan's foot rested on the rug, one socked ankle crossed loosely over the other. Milo lowered himself beside the sofa. Not across the room, not beside the hallway, beside Nathan. There were only inches between them. Nathan felt every instinct inside him suddenly become alert. He wanted to look down, wanted to smile, wanted to reach toward the dog whose trust he had waited nearly 6 months to earn. He did none of those things. Milo shifted. One front paw slid forward and came to rest lightly across Nathan's sock. Nathan finally looked down. The contact might have been accidental. It did not matter. Milo did not pull away. Minutes passed. The television murmured in the background. Milo's breathing slowed. His eyes closed. Nathan remained almost perfectly still, though his leg had begun to ache from the awkward position. He could have moved. Milo probably would have survived it. Nathan chose not to. For nearly 6 months he had been waiting for Milo to decide that being near him was safe. Now the young German shepherd was asleep with one paw resting on Nathan's foot. And Nathan understood enough not to ask the moment for anything more. By late September, the heat along the Virginia coast had begun to loosen its grip. Mornings came cooler now, with thin mist over low fields and the first dry leaves gathering along curbs in Virginia Beach. Milo had changed enough that strangers would have noticed it, but Nathan noticed something more important than the German shepherd's fuller chest or stronger legs. Milo had begun to look outward instead of constantly inward. He still watched unfamiliar people carefully. Sudden noises could still make his ears snap backward. Crowded spaces remained difficult. But curiosity now appeared before fear more often than it once had. On walks, Milo stopped to investigate fallen branches, patches of wet grass, and scents carried along fences. He had begun sniffing farther from Nathan instead of walking almost directly beneath his hand. After nearly 6 months of living as though the safest place in the world was wherever nothing unexpected could reach him, Milo was beginning to ask what might exist just beyond the familiar path. Nathan did not rush the change. That lesson had taken him too long to learn. He started with quiet places early in the morning, when sidewalks were nearly empty and the air still held the clean smell of damp grass. He chose wider paths where Milo would not feel trapped between strangers and parked cars. If someone approached, Nathan gave Milo room to move to the side, rather than tightening the leash and forcing him forward. Slowly, Milo's world expanded beyond the 3-townhouse loop he had once required 20 minutes to complete. The next step was a fenced training field Nathan had access to through a local dog facility. The field was simple. A broad rectangle of grass, bordered by chain-link fencing, several shade trees along one side, and no equipment left out when Nathan brought Milo there. Nathan deliberately chose it because there was nothing to accomplish except being outside. The first morning, Milo stayed within 3 feet of him. Nathan clipped a long training line to Milo's harness, leaving enough slack for freedom without removing safety. He did not throw a ball. He did not call repeatedly. He walked slowly toward the center of the field and let Milo choose. Milo followed almost against Nathan's boot. Nathan stopped. Milo stopped. Nathan took several more steps. Milo moved with him. "You know," Nathan said, glancing down at the young German shepherd, "you're allowed to have opinions about where we go." Milo looked up as though opinions were another human invention he had not been properly introduced to. Nathan smiled. Over the following visits, the distance changed by inches before it changed by feet. Milo wandered toward a patch of clover 5 feet away, sniffed it, and hurried back. On another morning, he reached 10 feet before looking over his shoulder to make sure Nathan was still there. Nathan resisted calling him back every time Milo checked. Karen had taught him that reassurance did not always need to arrive as instruction. Sometimes, simply remaining where he said he would be was enough. Nathan began practicing recall carefully. He used Milo's name once, followed by a simple cue, and rewarded the return without turning each repetition into a drill. Nathan knew enough about training to understand the danger of making freedom feel like a constant test. He wanted Milo to learn that moving away was permitted and coming back was worthwhile. At 5 feet, Milo returned quickly. At 10, he hesitated. At 20, he became distracted by a smell in the grass, and Nathan waited. At 30 feet, Milo looked very small. That distance affected Nathan more than he expected. He remembered the transport crate in Chesapeake, where Milo had struggled to place one paw beyond a metal threshold. Now the same dog stood 30 feet away with his nose buried in autumn grass. Freedom, Nathan thought, did not announce itself when a gate opened. Sometimes it appeared much later, when someone finally stopped measuring how close they needed to remain. Not every session went well. One morning a truck backfired on a road beyond the fence, and Milo immediately ran toward Nathan, body low, breathing fast. Months earlier, Nathan might have interpreted the reaction as lost progress. Now he simply crouched nearby without grabbing him. Milo settled within several minutes. The next week, he explored the same section of field again. Nathan had stopped expecting recovery to behave politely. Then came the morning Milo discovered running. Nothing caused it. There was no command. No thrown toy, no sudden fear. Nathan had unclipped the long line only after checking the gate twice and making certain the entire field was secure. Milo stood perhaps 15 feet away, sniffing near the fence. Nathan walked toward the center and turned. Milo lifted his head. For several seconds he stared. Then something changed in his posture. His shoulders lowered, his rear legs gathered beneath him, and he launched. Nathan barely had time to register what was happening before Milo tore across the grass at full speed, not toward the gate, not away from Nathan, just across the field. His long legs stretched beneath him with an awkward power he had never used before. He made a wide turn, leaned too hard, lost traction, and slid sideways through the grass. Nathan's heart jumped, but Milo was already back on his feet. Then he ran again, a second loop, then a third. Milo's mouth opened, his tongue hanging slightly to one side, ears bouncing with each stride. He looked less like the cautious dog Nathan knew, and more like a creature surprised by its own body. Nathan laughed so suddenly that he had to bend forward with his hands on his knees. Milo skidded past. "Apparently those things work," Nathan called, nodding toward his legs. Milo made another turn. For months, Nathan had watched fear determine the limits of Milo's movement. Now, movement itself seemed to be teaching Milo something. Legs did not exist only to retreat. Distance did not always mean danger. Speed could be joy. The thought stayed with Nathan later that week when he visited Helen. She had finished moving into the smaller townhouse near Rachel. Nathan had expected the new place to feel temporary, perhaps even sad. Instead, Helen had made it hers with irritating speed. A row of terracotta pots lined the small back patio. Basil, rosemary, and yellow chrysanthemums filled the space with green and gold. A narrow outdoor table sat beneath a striped umbrella. The brown radio Nathan had kept was gone from her life, but framed photographs had appeared on the new walls, fewer than before and somehow more visible, because they were not surrounded by decades of accumulated belongings. Helen opened the door wearing walking shoes, light gray pants, and a pale green windbreaker. "You're going somewhere?" Nathan asked. "Already went." "Where?" 3 miles. Nathan stared at her. Helen smiled. "Try not to look betrayed." She had begun walking every morning with 2 women from neighboring townhouses. She knew the name of the couple across the street, had learned which grocery store was easiest to reach, and had already volunteered to help organize a small community garden the following spring. Nathan walked through the living room slowly. "You hate it," Helen said. "No. You look like you're inspecting structural damage." "I'm adjusting." "To what?" Nathan glanced toward the patio. "You being happy here." Helen's expression softened. He had spent months treating the sale of the old house as a subtraction. The family home would be gone. Therefore, something important must become smaller. But Helen did not look smaller. She looked lighter. Nathan thought of Milo crossing the field. A familiar place could be safe and still become too small. A door could close behind someone without meaning they had lost where they belonged. What Nathan had called losing a home had for Helen become gaining room to choose how she wanted to live. The realization embarrassed him slightly because it had taken a dog to make the idea obvious. A few days later, Nathan returned to the fenced field with Milo. The young German shepherd explored with more confidence now, ranging farther than before. Nathan stood near the center and watched him reach the far side. 30 feet. Then farther. Milo slowed near the fence and sniffed a patch of weeds. Nathan felt the old instinct rise. Call him. Bring him back before the distance becomes uncomfortable. Nathan drew breath, then stopped. Milo lifted his head. He looked across the field. Their eyes met. Nathan said nothing. For one suspended moment, Milo remained where he was. Then he turned. He began trotting toward Nathan. The trot became a run. Milo crossed the grass faster and faster, ears upright, paws striking the ground in long, confident strides. Nathan dropped to one knee without thinking. Milo reached him and stopped directly in front of him. He did not leap into Nathan's arms. He did not press against his chest. He simply stood there, breathing hard, eyes bright, close enough that Nathan could feel the warmth coming off his body. Nathan smiled. That was enough. More than enough. Months ago, Milo had stayed inside an open crate because leaving felt impossible. Now he had been free to run as far as the fence allowed, and before Nathan ever called his name, Milo had chosen to come back. By late November, nearly 9 months had passed since Milo first came home, and the Virginia coast had settled into the clear, cool weather that arrived between autumn rain and the first real bite of winter. The young German shepherd had changed so much that Nathan sometimes caught himself studying him as though 2 different dogs somehow occupied the same body. Milo was no longer the thin 4-month-old puppy whose world had ended at the edge of a crate. He had grown into a tall, athletic young dog with a deep black saddle, rich tan legs, a broadening chest, and alert brown eyes that now looked toward unfamiliar things with curiosity almost as often as caution. His ears stood firmly upright, and the awkward paws that once seemed far too large had finally found a body capable of carrying them. At home, Milo played, dug, ran, slept near Nathan, and occasionally followed him from room to room without appearing to realize he was doing it. Outside, however, the old uncertainty had not disappeared completely. Quiet trails were manageable, open fields had become a joy, a handful of strangers could be tolerated. Crowds were different. Too many footsteps, voices, moving bicycles, rolling strollers, doors opening, and people approaching from unpredictable directions could still make Milo's body stiffen. Nathan had learned not to call that failure. Recovery did not require Milo to become a different kind of dog. It required him to have choices when the world became too much. On a Saturday morning, Nathan decided to take him to the waterfront in Norfolk. He chose the day deliberately. The forecast was clear, the temperature mild, and the waterfront was usually quiet in the earlier hours. Nathan parked several blocks away so Milo could approach gradually rather than step directly from the truck into activity. He also brought a large, reinforced dog carrier backpack he had recently purchased for outings. It had a structured base, ventilation panels, padded support, and openings designed so a dog could sit securely with the upper body exposed. Nathan had originally considered it excessive. After months of learning that giving Milo an exit made difficult situations easier, he had changed his mind. The first half hour went better than Nathan expected. Milo walked beside him along the river, stopping frequently to smell planters, wooden benches, and the bases of lampposts. The broad water seemed to fascinate him. He stared at a tugboat moving slowly across the Elizabeth River, ears shifting toward the low engine sound. A gull landed near the railing, and Milo watched it with such intense concentration that Nathan suspected the bird had unknowingly become the most important event of the morning. "Don't get ideas," Nathan said. The gull screamed once and flew away. Milo looked at Nathan as if disappointed by the negotiations. Nathan laughed and continued walking. As the morning moved toward midday, however, the waterfront grew busier. Families arrived. Couples passed in both directions. 2 cyclists came from behind. A group of teenagers laughed near a food kiosk. A stroller rattled across a seam in the pavement. Nathan noticed Milo change before the leash tightened. His mouth closed. His ears became rigid. His pace slowed. Then he stopped completely. Months earlier, Nathan might have encouraged him forward, believing movement would show Milo there was nothing to fear. Now Nathan understood that fear could not always be argued with by proving the world harmless. To Milo, the problem was not one person, one bicycle, or one sound. It was the accumulation of everything happening at once. Nathan moved toward a quieter bench beside the railing and sat. "Okay," he said softly. "We don't have to win the waterfront." Milo stood beside him, watching people pass. Nathan offered water. Milo drank a little. They stayed there several minutes. When Milo remained tense, Nathan set the reinforced backpack on the pavement and opened the top. He had practiced introducing Milo to it at home, without ever closing him inside. Milo had sniffed it, climbed into the lower section for treats, then forgotten about it. Nathan had not expected to need it that day. Milo looked down, then sniffed the opening. Nathan did not guide him. Milo put his nose inside, withdrew it, circled once and investigated again. One front paw entered, then the other. He climbed halfway into the padded carrier and stopped with his rear legs still outside. Nathan stared at him. "You're kidding." Milo looked over his shoulder. Nathan carefully helped position him inside, secured the safety tether to Milo's harness, checked the support beneath his body, and lifted the carrier onto his shoulders. Milo was no longer a small puppy, and Nathan immediately felt the weight. "You have gotten extremely expensive to carry," he muttered. Milo's head appeared above Nathan's right shoulder. His front legs rested along the padded upper edge of the carrier near Nathan's shoulders, safely supported rather than hanging loose. Nathan adjusted the straps and started walking slowly. The change was almost immediate. Milo could see everything without having to navigate through it. From behind Nathan's shoulder, the young German shepherd watched boats cross the river. His nose lifted into the breeze. A child passed holding a red balloon, and Milo followed it with his eyes but did not tense. People moved around them, yet Nathan's body formed a familiar boundary between Milo and much of the activity. After several minutes, Milo's mouth opened. His tongue appeared. His ears stood comfortably forward. Nathan glanced sideways and saw the edge of Milo's muzzle beside his cheek. "Well, this is ridiculous," Nathan said. Milo breathed happily into his ear. Nathan began laughing. The carrier was not a solution to Milo's fear, and Nathan knew better than to make it one. He would not use it to force Milo into places he was not ready to handle. It was simply another option, a temporary place to rest and observe when an outing became overwhelming. For a dog whose earliest security had come from confinement, the difference mattered. This space was not something Milo was trapped inside. He had approached it himself. He could associate it with Nathan, movement, and the possibility of coming back down when he was ready. The idea followed Nathan into Sunday evening, when the Brooks family gathered for their first real dinner in Helen's new townhouse. Nathan had expected the meal to feel wrong. The dining room was smaller than the one in the Chesapeake house. The table was newer. The walls did not hold decades of scuffs and family history. Yet within 10 minutes, Rachel was complaining that Helen had put too much rosemary on the potatoes. "I put exactly enough," Helen said. "You always say that. And you always eat them." Sophie, now sitting between them, was attempting to explain a school project while simultaneously removing every visible piece of onion from her plate. "Uncle Nathan," she said, "Mom says I have to leave them there instead of putting them on Grandma's plate." "Your mother has finally become unreasonable." Rachel pointed her fork at him. "Do not encourage her." Helen laughed. Nathan stopped eating for a second. The sound was exactly the same. Rachel still argued with Helen about cooking. Sophie still told stories too quickly. Helen still laughed until the corners of her hazel eyes folded into fine lines. The old house was gone from their lives. The family was sitting somewhere else. And nothing essential had disappeared. Nathan looked around the table and understood something so obvious he almost resented how long it had taken him to learn. A family did not live inside walls. Walls merely had the privilege of holding a family for a while. The following afternoon, Nathan returned to the Norfolk waterfront with Milo for another short outing. The path was quieter this time, and Milo walked confidently for most of it. Near the end, Nathan used the carrier again for several minutes while they stood beside the railing overlooking the water. An older woman passing nearby slowed and smiled. She was perhaps in her late 60s, petite, with short white hair, a red wool coat, and the cheerful directness of someone comfortable talking to strangers. "That may be the happiest passenger I've seen all week," she said. Nathan turned slightly. Milo's head rested above his shoulder, mouth open, eyes bright in the cool afternoon light. The woman lifted her phone. "Would you like a picture? You two look like you're having entirely too much fun." Nathan almost declined. Then he thought of the transport crate. The hardwood floor, the sunlight Milo had once refused to cross. "Sure," he said. The woman stepped back. Nathan turned his head toward Milo just as Milo leaned forward, his two front paws resting along the padded carrier near Nathan's shoulders. Nathan smiled. Milo's mouth opened wider, tongue visible, giving him the unmistakable appearance of smiling too. The phone captured them that way. A broad-shouldered Navy SEAL beside the water with a young German shepherd riding on his back, both looking absurdly pleased with themselves. Anyone seeing the photograph would have thought it was simply a happy man and his dog. Nathan knew what the picture could not show. 9 months earlier, Milo had been afraid to step through an open door. Now he was watching the world from Nathan's shoulder. And for once, he was not trying to hide from any of it. By late February, nearly a year had passed since Nathan Brooks first saw Milo pressed against the back wall of a transport crate in Chesapeake. Winter along the Virginia coast had been mild but restless, with cold rain moving in from the Atlantic, bare trees rattling in the wind, and occasional mornings when frost silvered the grass before disappearing beneath the sun. Milo was no longer the narrow 4-month-old puppy Nathan had carried home. The young German Shepherd had grown into a powerful, athletic dog with a broadening chest, long black and tan legs, a dark saddle across his back, and two alert ears that now seemed capable of detecting a delivery truck from another county. His brown eyes were brighter than they had been a year earlier, not because every trace of caution had disappeared, but because fear was no longer the first thing visible in them. Milo played. He explored. He chose where to sleep. He followed Nathan into the kitchen when something smelled interesting, and occasionally stole a sock with enough confidence to suggest he considered household law negotiable. Yet one habit remained. When Nathan came through the front door, Milo usually watched from several feet away. Sometimes his tail moved. Sometimes he approached after Nathan had settled. He still had never rushed to meet him. Nathan had stopped waiting for that particular milestone. That, more than anything, showed how much he had changed. A 4-day training rotation took Nathan away from Virginia Beach near the end of the month. His work as a Navy SEAL had always included periods when plans belonged to someone else, and he had known from the beginning that adopting Milo meant building reliable care around those absences, rather than pretending they would disappear. Rachel agreed to stay at the townhouse with Milo. He knew his routines. Sophie had become one of the people he accepted easily, and Nathan trusted his sister to follow instructions without turning them into a committee meeting. Before leaving, he placed Milo's food schedule on the refrigerator anyway. Rachel looked at it and raised one eyebrow. "You realize I'm a nurse. Good, then the numbers should be manageable. There are notes about which direction he prefers to walk around the block. He has standards. You have issues." Nathan smiled, scratched Milo gently beneath the chest only after the dog leaned toward him, and left without creating a dramatic goodbye. Months earlier he might have worried whether the absence would damage everything they had built. Now he understood trust differently. Trust was not the absence of separation. It was the belief that separation did not mean abandonment. The training days were long, wet, and physically demanding. Nathan slept little, ate when there was time, and rarely checked his phone except during breaks. Rachel sent short updates. Milo acted breakfast. Milo dug beside the planter again. Sophie had visited and read on the rug while Milo slept near her feet. One photograph showed Milo standing at the window looking toward the driveway. Nathan stared at it longer than he intended, then put the phone away. When he finally returned 4 days later, darkness had already settled over the neighborhood. Nathan was tired enough that his duffel felt twice its normal weight. Rachel's car was gone. She had left after feeding Milo and making certain Nathan was close to home. Nathan pulled into the driveway, sat for a moment while the engine ticked softly as it cooled, then gathered his bag and walked toward the door. He did not think about Milo's reaction. He was thinking about a shower, clean clothes, and whether there was anything edible left in the refrigerator. Nathan unlocked the door. For half a second the house was quiet. Then came the sound. Toenails struck the hallway floor in a rapid, uneven rhythm. Nathan looked up. Milo appeared at the far end of the hall. The German Shepherd did not stop. Nathan had seen him run across a fenced field, race through the backyard during zoomies, and charge after a tennis ball with the wholehearted seriousness of a dog convinced the ball had committed a crime. He had never seen Milo run toward him like this. The dog crossed the living room at full speed. "Milo!" Nathan barely got the name out. Milo came straight to him, tail sweeping violently from side to side. He pressed his head against Nathan's torso, backed up half a step, then pushed forward again as though unable to decide what to do with the intensity of his own excitement. His entire rear half seemed to wag with his tail. Nathan dropped the duffel. Then he dropped to his knees. Milo pushed his face beneath Nathan's arm. Nathan wrapped both arms around him carefully, waiting for the stiffness that would once have followed any unexpected contact. It did not come. Milo stayed. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. There was no dramatic rescue happening, no emergency, no sudden discovery that Milo possessed some extraordinary ability. No single miracle had transformed him overnight. The moment existed because of hundreds of almost invisible ones that had come before it. One paw beyond a crate, 6 feet beneath a coffee table, drinking water with a person nearby, sleeping on his side, lying 8 feet from Sophie, waiting behind a curtain, chewing a bone without watching the door, running across a field, returning without being called. Nearly a year had passed before Milo learned that someone coming home could be something worth running toward. Human beings often wanted change to have a single cause because single causes made stories easier to understand. Nathan knew better now. Milo had not been changed by one great act of love. He had been changed by ordinary safety, repeated so many times that one day fear simply failed to arrive first. That evening, after Nathan showered and ate whatever Rachel had left in the refrigerator, he settled onto the sofa. Milo wandered through the living room, checked the kitchen, returned, then stood beside the couch. Nathan glanced down but said nothing. Milo looked at the cushion. In earlier months he had never shown any interest in climbing onto furniture. Nathan had never forced the issue. Milo placed one front paw on the sofa, then the other. He climbed up awkwardly, turned once, twice, a third time because apparently 3 circles were required by German Shepherd law. Then Milo lowered himself beside Nathan. Nathan remained still. Milo shifted closer. His head came down across Nathan's thigh. The weight surprised him, so did the trust. Nathan slowly rested one hand against Milo's shoulder. Milo exhaled and closed his eyes. Nathan looked toward the open crate still standing in the far corner of the room. He had left it there because Milo sometimes chose to sleep inside it, though the door had not been closed in months. Once Nathan had viewed the crate as something Milo needed to escape. Now he understood that freedom had never required Milo to hate the place where he once felt safe. Freedom meant he could choose it or leave it, without fear deciding for him. Life continued changing around them. Helen settled fully into her townhouse and somehow acquired more friends in several months than Nathan had made in several years on the same street. She walked most mornings, tended the herbs on her patio, and had begun hosting coffee for 2 neighbors every Thursday. Rachel and Sophie lived close enough that Sophie sometimes walked over after school with Rachel, bringing whatever book she was currently reading and immediately asking where Milo was. Nathan no longer looked at Helen's new home as a replacement for the Chesapeake house. It was simply where his mother lived now. The old home still existed in photographs, stories, the brown radio on Nathan's shelf, and his father's tools in the garage. Nothing valuable had needed to remain physically unchanged in order to remain part of them. Nathan's own life did not become magically simpler. He remained a Navy SEAL. Training schedules changed, duty sometimes interrupted weekends. There were mornings when he left before sunrise and evenings when he returned later than planned. What changed was the way Nathan worked around the things he could control. He protected time for Milo instead of assuming it would appear on its own. Rachel remained the primary backup caregiver, and Nathan kept another trusted arrangement available when work required longer absences. He scheduled quieter outings after demanding weeks, and stopped filling every free hour simply because he could. He had not become softer, less disciplined, or unrecognizable to himself. He had only learned that discipline was not the same thing as forcing every process onto a timetable. Not everything worth building arrived on schedule. By early summer, the mornings were bright again, and Nathan returned with Milo to the Norfolk waterfront. The dog carrier backpack came along mostly as a joke now. Milo had grown so much that Nathan knew their old routine was nearing its natural end. After a quiet walk beside the water, Nathan opened the reinforced carrier. Milo sniffed it, then climbed in with the familiarity of an old ritual. Nathan secured him properly and lifted the considerable weight onto his back. "Oh, absolutely not much longer," Nathan muttered. Milo rested his front legs near Nathan's shoulders. The breeze moved across the river and through his black and tan coat. Nathan walked toward the railing. A year earlier, sunlight across a hardwood floor had been enough to make Milo retreat. The world beyond an open crate had seemed too large to enter. Milo had needed to learn that stepping outside would not hurt him, then that floors were safe, that ordinary sounds would pass, that people could share a room without demanding anything, that toys were for playing, that legs could carry him toward joy instead of only away from fear, that distance could be explored, that returning was his choice, and finally, that when a familiar truck entered the driveway after several days away, the sound could mean someone he loved had come home. Nathan turned his head. Milo leaned forward and licked the side of his face. Nathan laughed, nearly losing his balance under the dog's weight. Yeah, enjoy it while you still fit." Milo's mouth opened in the easy, relaxed expression Nathan had once waited months to see. The metal door of Milo's first cage had been opened almost a year earlier, but Nathan finally understood that the moment of release had never been the same thing as freedom. Freedom began much later, when Milo no longer needed bars around him to believe he was safe. Milo's story reminds us that freedom is not always the moment a door opens. Sometimes the hardest cages are the ones fear leaves behind, and healing begins through ordinary days when someone simply keeps showing up. People often want change quickly. We want grief to pass, trust to return, families to adjust, and wounded hearts to become whole on our schedule. But Milo teaches a gentler truth. Progress can be almost invisible and still be real. A quiet step forward matters. So does waiting without demanding. Perhaps that is where God often places his miracles, not only in dramatic moments, but in patience we did not know we possessed, in courage that grows slowly, and in the right companion appearing when a frightened soul needs one most. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Tell us in the comments what Milo's journey meant to you, and subscribe for more stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you patience for every heart in your life that is still learning to feel safe.